A hush falls over the charity gala as she enters. Annalise, 7 months pregnant and radiant in emerald silk, her hand instinctively resting on her swollen belly. Her husband, the millionaire titan Julian Croft, is by her side, the epitome of devotion. But then, across the crowded room, a flash of familiar brilliance catches her eye. On the hand of a stunning redhead, draped in diamonds, is a ring, her wedding ring, the one-of-a-kind, custom-made symbol of her life, her love, her future. In that gut-wrenching moment, her perfect world shatters. But this is not a story of a woman broken. This is the story of a wife's cold, calculated revenge that will bring a king to his knees, weeping amongst the ruins of his empire. Annalise had always believed their life was a fairy tale. She'd met Julian Croft at a Sotheby's auction where she was a junior art appraiser, and he was the enigmatic billionaire bidding on a rare Monet. He hadn't won the painting, but he had, in his own words, won the greatest prize in the room. Their courtship was a whirlwind of private jets to Paris, for dinner surprise trips to see the northern lights from a glass igloo in Finland, and a proposal on a private yacht in the shadow of the Amalfi Coast. He was charming, attentive, and utterly intoxicating. Their wedding was the stuff of legends, a multi-million-dollar affair at the Oheka Castle on Long Island, featured in the glossy pages of Vogue. Julian had presented her with the ring, a breathtaking 7-carat, cushion-cut diamond, flanked by 2 rare pink diamonds set in a custom-designed platinum band that mirrored the scrollwork of the castle's gates. "A ring for a queen," he had whispered, his blue eyes earnest. "A symbol of a love as unique and unbreakable as this diamond." Annalise, a woman who had grown up in a modest suburban home, was swept away by the sheer grandeur of it all, but more so by the seeming sincerity in his gaze. Life as Mrs. Croft was lived in a gilded cage, though for the first few years, Annalise only saw the gold. Their penthouse on Park Avenue offered panoramic views of Central Park, a canvas that changed with the seasons. Their staff, a silent, efficient army, catered to their every whim. She had a black Amex with no limit, a personal shopper at Bergdorf's, and a garage filled with cars she rarely drove. Julian was a demanding husband, his schedule packed with international business trips and high-stakes meetings. But he always made time for her, or so it seemed. He'd fly home from Tokyo just to have dinner with her, showering her with lavish gifts that served as glittering apologies for his absence. He was the architect of her life, and she, in her love-dazed state, had willingly handed him the blueprints. He encouraged her to leave her job at Sotheby's, arguing that a Croft shouldn't be working for anyone else. He suggested she focus on philanthropy, a more suitable role for a woman of her new stature. Annalise, eager to please the man she adored, had agreed. She poured her energy into chairing committees for children's hospitals and art foundations, her name becoming synonymous with high society charity. The first crack in the gilded facade appeared subtly. It was a stray text message she glimpsed on his phone late one night. "You left your watch here." The name was unfamiliar, KV. When she'd casually asked about it the next morning, Julian had been smooth dismissive. KV. "Oh, Ken Velocity, one of my VPs. We were working late at the office. He's a bit of a mess, always leaving things behind." It was a plausible lie delivered with the easy confidence of a man who rarely had to explain himself. Annalise, wanting to believe him, let it go. But then came other things. The scent of a perfume that wasn't hers, lingering on his suit jacket. A heady, musky scent, so different from her light floral fragrances. The late-night board meetings that stretched into the early hours of the morning. The hushed phone calls he would take on the terrace, his back turned to her, his voice a low, urgent murmur. Each instance was a small stone dropped into the placid pool of her marriage, sending out ripples of unease. When she told him she was pregnant, Julian had been ecstatic, or at least he'd performed the part convincingly. He'd swept her up in his arms, his eyes shining with what she took for joyous tears. A son, he'd boomed, already certain of the gender. An heir to the Croft empire. He became even more attentive, if that were possible. He hired a private chef to cater to her pregnancy cravings, a prenatal yoga instructor, and a team of the best doctors in New York City. He would rest his hand on her growing belly, a proprietary gesture that she found both comforting and vaguely unsettling. "My two most precious assets," he would say, his voice thick with a satisfaction that in hindsight felt more like a banker admiring his portfolio than a husband cherishing his family. Yet even amidst the flurry of preparations for the baby, the disconnect grew. He was physically present more often, but emotionally he seemed 1,000 miles away. He was more guarded with his phone, his laptop always angled away from her. The business trips became more frequent now, with the added excuse of securing the legacy for our son. He went to Singapore, to Dubai, to London. Annalise, grounded by her advancing pregnancy, was left behind in the silent, opulent penthouse, the city lights glittering below like a sea of distant stars. It was during his last trip, a supposed 3-day conference in Geneva, that the lie began to unravel completely. He called her every night, his voice a warm caress over the phone lines, telling her how much he missed her, how he couldn't wait to come home to his beautiful wife and their unborn child. On the second night, while they were talking, she heard a faint sound in the background, the distinctive chime of the funicular at the Grand Hotel Victoria in Interlaken, a sound she remembered vividly from a trip they had taken early in their relationship. Geneva was miles from Interlaken. "Where are you, Julian? It sounds so lovely," she'd asked, her voice light, betraying none of the cold dread that was beginning to seep into her veins. There was a split second of silence, a digital void that stretched for an eternity. "Just in the hotel lobby, darling," he'd replied, his voice a little too loud, a little too jovial. "It's quite a grand place. Reminds me a little of that spot in Interlaken, actually. Funny you should say that." Funny. That night, Annalise didn't sleep. The gilded cage had begun to feel like a prison, the panoramic views mocking her confinement. She thought of her wedding ring, the weighty symbol of their unbreakable love, sitting on her finger. She had taken it off a week ago, her fingers too swollen from the pregnancy. It sat in its velvet box in their wall safe waiting. Julian had noticed its absence and insisted she wear it on a chain around her neck, but she had refused, saying it was uncomfortable. The truth was, she couldn't bear the feel of it against her skin. The cold metal, a constant reminder of the chilling distance growing between them. The day of the annual Miracles for Kids Gala, the flagship event of her philanthropic calendar, arrived. Julian had flown back from Geneva that morning, looking tanned and refreshed. He presented her with an obscenely large bouquet of her favorite white peonies and a new diamond necklace. "To adorn my beautiful queen tonight," he'd said, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. Annalise played her part, the adoring, expectant wife. She allowed him to fasten the necklace around her neck, her skin crawling at his touch. She smiled and thanked him, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. As she got ready, her glam squad, a team of 4 who descended upon the penthouse like a whirlwind of hairspray and couture, chattered excitedly around her. They dressed her in a custom-made emerald silk gown by Brandon Maxwell, the deep green hue complementing her auburn hair. The fabric skimmed her baby bump, a testament to the life she was carrying, a life she would protect with the ferocity of a lioness. As she surveyed her reflection in the mirror, she saw a woman she barely recognized. The naivety was gone from her eyes, replaced by a hard, crystalline clarity. The fairy tale was over. She was the queen of a crumbling castle, married to a king of lies. And as she prepared to step into the public eye to play her role on the grand stage of New York society, she had no idea that tonight the final brutal truth would be revealed, not in a hushed whisper, but in the audacious, blinding sparkle of her own wedding ring on another woman's hand. She felt a grim resolve settle over her. The gilded cage was about to be blown wide open, and she would be the one holding the dynamite. The ballroom at the Plaza Hotel was a sea of glittering opulence. Crystal chandeliers dripping with thousands of hand-cut prisms cast a warm, golden glow over the city's elite. The air hummed with the murmur of polite conversation, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the soft strains of a string quartet. Annalise moved through the crowd with a practiced grace, her hand linked through Julian's arm. She smiled, she nodded. She accepted compliments on her gown and her radiant pregnancy glow. Each smile felt like a crack in a carefully constructed mask. Julian was in his element, the master of this universe. He greeted fellow titans of industry with firm handshakes and powerful men in politics with knowing smiles. He introduced Annalise with a possessive pride, his hand always resting on the small of her back, or more frequently, on her stomach. "My brilliant wife, Annalise," he would say, "the heart of my world and the mother of my future." People would coo, impressed by the public display of affection, the picture of a perfect, powerful couple. Annalise felt like a prop in his elaborate stage play. She scanned the faces in the crowd, a knot of anxiety tightening in her chest. Every beautiful woman who laughed a little too long at Julian's jokes, every admiring glance that lingered on him sent a jolt of suspicion through her. Was it her or her? The paranoia was a bitter taste in her mouth, a stark contrast to the sweet champagne she couldn't drink. They took their seats at the head table, a position of honor befitting their status as the event's primary benefactors. Annalise was seated between Julian and a desiccated old-money matron whose diamonds looked as ancient as her lineage. The program began a series of speeches and a heart-wrenching video about the children the foundation helped. Annalise watched, her heart genuinely moved, but her mind was elsewhere. It was a strange, disorienting duality to be so publicly celebrated for her compassion, while her private world was consumed by a cold, burgeoning rage. Julian leaned over, his breath warm against her ear. "You've outdone yourself this year, my love. A record-breaking fundraiser." He squeezed her thigh under the table, a gesture that was meant to be intimate but felt invasive. "We make a damn good team." Annalise simply smiled, a tight, brittle thing. "It's all for the children," she said, her voice a placid surface above a churning abyss of turmoil. It was during the live auction, the centerpiece of the evening's fundraising, that her world finally imploded. The auctioneer was a fast-talking, charismatic man, coaxing bids from the city's wealthiest patrons for extravagant prizes a week on a private island, a walk-on role in a Hollywood blockbuster, a vintage Porsche. Julian Ever the Showman was an active participant, his hand shooting up to place ever higher bids, drawing gasps and applause from the crowd. He had just won a private dinner for 10, cooked by the world-renowned chef Daniel Hum of 11 Madison Park, for a staggering $200,000. A wave of applause erupted, and Julian stood to take a bow, a magnanimous smile plastered on his face. As he settled back into his seat, Basking in the glow of his public largesse, Annalise's gaze drifted across the room. And then she saw her. She was standing near the back of the ballroom, partially obscured by a large floral arrangement. A striking redhead, with a cascade of fiery curls, poured into a swan-red dress that clung to her every curve. She was laughing, her head thrown back, a flute of champagne held aloft in a slender, elegant hand. And on that hand, on the third finger, was a flash of brilliance that was as familiar to Annalise as her own reflection. Time seemed to slow down. The auctioneer's patter faded into a distant buzz. The murmuring of the crowd became a dull roar. Annalise's entire being focused on that single searing point of light. It couldn't be. Her mind rebelled, searching for a rational explanation. It was a similar ring, a coincidence, a cruel trick of the light. But she knew. She knew the way the light caught the facets of the cushion-cut diamond. She knew the fiery sparkle of the two rare pink diamonds that flanked it. She knew the intricate scrolling design of the platinum band, a design she had sketched herself. A design that was supposed to symbolize their unique, eternal love. It was her wedding ring, the one-of-a-kind masterpiece by the legendary jeweler Jar that Julian had commissioned for her. The ring that was supposed to be locked securely in their safe at home. The redhead lifted her hand to brush a stray curl from her face, and the ring caught the full glare of the chandelier. It was an audacious, ostentatious display. A declaration. The woman's eyes swept the room, and for a fleeting, terrifying moment, they met Annalise's. There was no flicker of recognition, no sign of guilt. Just a cool, appraising glance, the look of a victor surveying her territory. A wave of nausea so intense it almost buckled her washed over Annalise. The air in the ballroom suddenly felt thick, suffocating. The emerald silk of her gown was a vice squeezing the breath from her lungs. This was KV. This was the woman whose perfume clung to her husband's suits. This was the woman he was with in Geneva, or rather, Interlaken. This was the woman who had not only stolen her husband, but had the audacity, the unmitigated gall to wear the symbol of her sacred vows on her own hand, in a room full of people who knew Annalise as Julian's wife. She turned to Julian, her movement stiff, robotic. He was oblivious, smiling at someone across the table, the picture of contentment. The betrayal was so profound, so brazen it was almost surreal. He hadn't just cheated on her. He had given this woman the most intimate, meaningful symbol of their marriage. He had, in effect, replaced her. Her vision tunneled. The room began to spin. She saw the redhead again, now talking to a man Annalise recognized as one of Julian's junior executives. She was animated, confident, the ring flashing with every gesture. It was a performance, and Annalise was the unwilling, unknowing audience. "Julian," she said, her voice a strangled whisper. It was a testament to her iron will that any sound came out at all. He turned to her, his smile faltering slightly at the sight of her pale, stricken face. "What is it, darling? Are you feeling unwell? Is it the baby?" "I need some air," she managed to say, her hand gripping the edge of the table to steady herself. "Of course," he said instantly, solicitous the concerned husband act snapping back into place. He stood and helped her to her feet, his touch now feeling like a brand on her skin. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said to the table, his voice smooth as silk. "My wife is feeling a little faint. Please excuse us." As he guided her out of the ballroom, his arm firmly around her. Annalise risked one last look over her shoulder. The redhead was watching them go, a small, knowing smirk playing on her lips. It was a look of triumph. They reached the relative quiet of the hotel's grand corridor, its marble floors and gilded mirrors reflecting their distorted images. Annalise pulled away from him, stumbling against a velvet settee. "Annalise, what's wrong?" Julian asked, his brow furrowed with a performance of concern. Annalise looked at him. Truly, looked at him for the first time in a long time. She saw the handsome face, the charming smile, the expensive, perfectly tailored tuxedo. But underneath it all, she saw the lie. She saw the hollowness, the deceit, the casual cruelty of a man who could so completely and utterly desecrate their life together. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. The shock was too deep, the betrayal too absolute for tears. A terrifying glacial calm settled over her. It was the calm of a dormant volcano, the pressure building, the magma churning just beneath the surface. "Who is she?" she asked, her voice eerily level. Julian's face went blank. "Who is who?" "Darling, you're not making any sense. You need to sit down. I'll get you some water." "The redhead," Annalise said, her eyes boring into his. "In the red dress, the one wearing my wedding ring." The color drained from Julian's face. For the first time since she had known him, the mask of confident control slipped, revealing a flicker of pure, unadulterated panic. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The master manipulator, the king of lies, was for once speechless. Annalise didn't need his confession. The truth was there in his terrified eyes. It was there, glittering on another woman's hand in a crowded ballroom. The fairy tale hadn't just ended. It had been a lie from the very beginning. And in that moment, in the cold, gilded corridor of the Plaza Hotel, the heartbroken wife died, and a woman bent on revenge was born. The ride home in the back of the Maybach was a study in suffocating silence. The city lights smeared across the windows, a kaleidoscope of colors that Annalise didn't see. She sat pressed against her door, as far from Julian as the plush leather seats would allow. The glacial calm that had descended upon her in the hotel corridor had solidified into something harder, colder. It was the calm of a battlefield after the initial devastating volley, the air thick with the promise of more violence to come. Julian, for his part, attempted to fill the void with clumsy, desperate lies. It was a misunderstanding, Annalise. A terrible, terrible mistake. She's no one, a business acquaintance, who is obsessed, delusional. The ring. She must have had a replica made. It's insane, I know. I'll deal with it. I'll call security. Annalise remained silent, her gaze fixed on the passing cityscape. Every word he spoke was an insult to her intelligence, another shovelful of dirt on the grave of their marriage. A replica of a one-of-a-kind jar creation. The absurdity of it was almost laughable. He was treating her like an idiot, a hysterical pregnant woman who could be soothed with platitudes and pathetic falsehoods. He had no idea who he was sitting next to anymore. The compliant, adoring wife he had molded was gone. In her place was a stranger, a woman with ice in her veins and a storm gathering in her soul. When they arrived at the penthouse, the silence followed them, thick and menacing. The vast, art-filled rooms, once a source of pride and comfort, now felt like a mausoleum. Annalise walked directly to the master suite and stood before the walk-in closet, a room larger than most New York apartments. She began to pack. Not her own things. His. She pulled his Tom Ford suits from their hangers, the fabric a reminder of his scent, his presence. She let them fall to the floor in a heap. She swept his collection of Patek Philippe watches from their velvet-lined trays into a canvas laundry bag. She emptied his drawers of silk ties, monogrammed shirts, and cashmere sweaters. She worked with a methodical, dispassionate fury, her movements economical and precise. Julian watched her, his panic escalating into a frantic desperation. "Annalise, please stop this. Let's talk. We can fix this. Whatever you think you saw, it's not what it seems." She didn't grace him with a response. She was no longer a participant in his reality. She was creating her own. "It's the pregnancy," he said, his voice taking on a wheedling, condescending tone. "Your hormones are all over the place. You're being emotional. Let's just sleep on it. Everything will look different in the morning." That was the final straw. The casual, dismissive chauvinism of his words ignited the volcano. Annalise stopped her packing and turned to face him, her eyes blazing with a cold fire. "Emotional?" she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "You think I'm being emotional? Let me tell you what I'm feeling, Julian. I'm feeling clarity. For the first time in years. I see you. I see you for the pathetic, narcissistic, lying coward that you are." She picked up the canvas bag, heavy with his expensive watches. "You didn't just cheat on me, Julian. You gave her my ring. My ring. The one you said was a symbol of our unbreakable love. You took the most sacred promise we made, and you pinned it on your whore like a prize ribbon." She walked towards him, and for the first time he flinched, taking a step back. "You didn't just break my heart," she continued, her voice rising with each word. "You tried to break my spirit. You isolated me. You made me dependent on you. You turned me into a pretty accessory for your gilded life. And you thought I was too stupid, too weak, too emotional to ever see it." She was standing directly in front of him now, the full force of her fury directed at him. He looked smaller, somehow diminished. The powerful titan of industry was just a man, a cheating husband caught in a lie. "You're right about one thing," she said, her voice dropping back to a lethal whisper. "Things will look different in the morning, because in the morning you will be gone." She thrust the heavy bag into his chest. "Get out of my house." "Your house?" he sputtered, a flash of his old arrogance returning. "Annalise, be reasonable. This is my name on the deed, my money that paid for everything. You have nothing." A slow, chilling smile spread across Annalise's face. It was a smile that did not reach her eyes. "That's where you're wrong, Julian. I have something you never counted on. I have a brain. And while you were out playing games, I was learning. While you were building your empire, I was watching. I know your business. I know your secrets. I know where all the bodies are buried. You see, I was the perfect supportive wife. I listened during those endless dinner parties with your lawyers and your bankers. I read the documents you so carelessly left on your desk. I paid attention." The color drained from his face again. He had always underestimated her, seen her as a beautiful but ultimately decorative part of his life. He had never considered her a threat. "You have until sunrise to be gone," she said, her voice final. "Take what you can carry. The rest will be disposed of." With that, she turned her back on him and walked out of the room, leaving him standing amidst the ruins of his wardrobe, the dawning horror of his miscalculation finally sinking in. Annalise did not sleep. The adrenaline surging through her was a powerful stimulant. She went not to her own bedroom, but to the Home Office, a sleek, modern room that Julian had always considered his exclusive domain. She sat down in his large leather chair. It still felt warm. She booted up his computer. As she had predicted, He hadn't even bothered to log out. His arrogance was his Achilles heel. Her mind, once clouded by love and denial, was now a finely tuned instrument of vengeance. She was no longer just a scorned wife. She was the architect of ruin. Her first call was at 3 a.m. to her father, a retired, unassuming high school history teacher from Queens. He was the moral compass of her life. She told him everything, the words pouring out of her in a calm, steady stream. There was no hysteria, only the cold, hard facts. He didn't interrupt. He just listened. When she was done, there was a pause. "What do you need, Annie?" he asked, his voice a balm of unconditional support. "I need a warrior," she said. Her second call was to a name she had filed away in her memory from one of those long, tedious dinner parties, a name Julian had mentioned with a mixture of fear and respect. Delilah Vance, a notorious shark-like divorce attorney, known for eviscerating powerful men. Her specialty was forensic accounting, finding the money that philandering husbands tried to hide. Her slogan, whispered in hushed tones in the powder rooms of the Upper East Side, was, "I don't get you a settlement, I get you the company." Her third call was to a man named Marco. He was the head of her security detail, a former Mossad agent whom Julian had hired, but who had developed a quiet, paternal loyalty to Annalise. He was a man of few words and immense capability. "Marco," she said when he answered on the first ring, "I have a situation. I need you at the apartment in 1 hour, and I need a team, a discreet team." By the time the first pale light of dawn crept over the Manhattan skyline, Annalise's war room was assembled. Marco and his team, two grim-faced men who looked like they could walk through walls, had secured the apartment. They had escorted a stunned, disheveled Julian, carrying a single suitcase and a laundry bag of watches, out of the building. They had changed the locks, the codes, and swept the entire penthouse for listening devices. Annalise, still in her emerald silk gown from the night before, stood at the panoramic window, watching the sunrise. The city was waking up a sprawling, indifferent beast. But Annalise was not indifferent. She was focused. She was energized. She was about to go to war. She thought of the baby, kicking gently inside her. This was no longer just about her. It was about her child. Her child would not be raised in the shadow of a liar. Her child would not be a pawn in an empire of deceit. She would build her own empire, an empire of truth and strength on the ashes of Julian's. She looked at her reflection in the window. The woman staring back at her was a stranger forged in the fires of betrayal. The pain was still there, a deep, aching wound. But now it was overlaid with something else, a steely, unwavering resolve. She was no longer Julian Croft's wife. She was Annalise Varenne, her father's daughter. And she was about to become Julian Croft's reckoning. The game had just begun, and she was changing all the rules. The days that followed were a masterclass in calculated demolition. While Julian was likely holed up in a hotel suite, licking his wounds and underestimating her yet again, Annalise was assembling her army and laying the groundwork for his complete and utter ruin. The penthouse, once a symbol of her gilded captivity, became her command center. The dining room table where she had hosted countless insipid dinners for Julian's associates was now covered in laptops, legal documents, and financial statements. Her first meeting was with Delilah Vance. The lawyer was exactly as advertised, sharp, impeccably dressed in a steel-gray Armani suit, with eyes that seemed to see right through to the bottom line. She listened to Annalise's story without a flicker of emotion, her perfectly manicured fingers steepled under her chin. "The ring is a gift," Delilah said, her voice a low, precise purr. "Legally, it's his to give. Morally, it's a declaration of war. And in a war, we take no prisoners." She smiled, a flash of predatory brilliance. "You've come to the right place, Mrs. Croft. Or should I say, Miss Varenne." Ms. Varenne Annalise confirmed, a surge of strength coursing through her. "And I don't just want a divorce, Delilah. I want to dismantle him. I want to take away everything he values. His money, his reputation, his company." Delilah finished for her. "Standard procedure. What assets do we know about? And more importantly, what assets do we not know about?" This was where Annalise's years as the observant, underestimated wife paid off. She began to speak her memory, a steel trap. She detailed offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands that Julian had bragged about after too much single malt scotch. She recalled hushed conversations about shell corporations used to acquire properties in London and Hong Kong. She remembered the names of executives he'd paid off, the government contracts he'd secured through less than legal means, the creative accounting practices he'd joked about with his CFO. Delilah's eyes, which had been sharp before, now gleamed with the avaricious delight of a treasure hunter who had just been handed a map. "Ms. Varenne," she said, pulling a specialized encrypted laptop from her briefcase. "You are a goddamn gift. My forensic team will have a field day with this. We're not just going to divorce him, we're going to flay him." While Delilah's team of financial bloodhounds began their digital hunt, Annalise turned her attention to the more personal front of her campaign. She knew that to truly break Julian, she had to attack his ego, the most fragile and inflated part of him. Her next move was subtle but devastating. Through a discreet public relations firm, recommended by Delilah, she leaked a story to Page 6, the Bible of New York gossip. The item was carefully worded, a masterpiece of insinuation. It spoke of a beloved philanthropic power couple on the brink of collapse. It hinted at a brazen, flame-haired mistress and a symbolic betrayal that has left the beautiful, expectant wife reeling. It didn't name names, but in their rarefied world, it didn't have to. The city's elite would know exactly who the column was about. The fallout was immediate. Annalise's phone, which she had set to silent, lit up with calls and texts from concerned friends. Julian, predictably, was furious. He left a string of increasingly unhinged voicemails, alternating between threats and pathetic pleas. Annalise listened to them with a detached sense of satisfaction, then forwarded them to Delilah's legal team. That she moved on to the art. Julian's collection was his pride and joy, a tangible representation of his wealth and supposed sophistication. It was also, as Annalise knew, almost entirely in her name. In the early days of their marriage, in a move designed to protect his assets from potential business liabilities, he had purchased and registered the entire collection, the Monet, the Warhol, the Basquiat, under Annalise Varenne. He had seen it as a clever legal maneuver. He had never imagined she would be the liability. Annalise contacted Sotheby's, her former employer. She spoke to her old boss, a man who had always been fond of her and had been disappointed when she'd left. She explained in vague but compelling terms that she was entering a new chapter of her life and wished to liquidate some of her assets. The timing was perfect. The fall auction season was approaching. The press release from Sotheby's announcing the private collection of Annalise Varenne for sale was a bombshell. It listed the key pieces, their staggering estimates, sending shockwaves through the art world. For Julian, this was a public castration. His friends, his business partners, his rivals. Everyone would see that his precious art collection was being sold off by his estranged wife. It was a direct hit to his reputation, a sign that the great Julian Croft was losing control. But Annalise's masterstroke was yet to come. It involved the Mistress. The woman she now knew was named Kendra Vance, no relation to her lawyer, a fact that provided a moment of dark cosmic humor. Annalise had Marco and his team do a thorough but discreet investigation into Kendra. The results were both predictable and useful. Kendra was a former model turned brand consultant, a profession that seemed to involve accompanying wealthy men to exotic locations. She had a taste for the finer things in life and a significant social media presence, a curated feed of luxury travel designer clothes and cryptic captions about living her best life. Annalise studied Kendra's Instagram feed like a general studying a battlefield map. She saw photos taken on the terrace of a hotel in Interlaken, posted during the time Julian was supposedly in Geneva. She saw a picture of a new Cartier watch, a gift from a special someone, posted a week after Julian had claimed a late-night board meeting. Kendra wasn't just a mistress. She was a braggart, and her vanity would be her undoing. Annalise's plan was audacious, and it required a key piece of information: the location of the ring. She knew Kendra would be flaunting it. After the gala, the woman had become bolder, posting a blurry photo of her hand on a man's chest, the 7-carat diamond deliberately in focus. The opportunity came in the form of the annual Serpentine Summer Party, a major event on the international social circuit held in London. Julian was a co-chair of the event. It was the perfect stage. Annalise knew he would be there, desperate to project an image of normalcy and control, and she knew he would bring Kendra. It was his style, arrogant, defiant, and stupid. Annalise would not be attending. Her revenge would be delivered remotely. She booked a suite at the Connaught, her favorite London hotel. She flew in 2 days before the party, her baby bump now a prominent, undeniable statement of her reality. She met with a specialized team that Delilah had arranged, a group of former British intelligence officers who now ran a high-end corporate espionage firm. Her instructions were precise. They were to infiltrate the Serpentine Party. They were not to approach Julian or Kendra. Their mission was focused on one thing, and one thing only: the ring. "I don't want it back," Annalise told the lead agent, a man with pale, watchful eyes. "I want it documented. I want high-resolution, undeniable proof that she is wearing it at this event with him. I want video, I want photos. I want to be able to see the hallmark inside the band." The night of the party, Annalise sat in her hotel suite, a live feed from her team displayed on a large screen. She watched as Julian and Kendra arrived, a tableau of smug defiance. Kendra was stunning in a silver gown, her red hair a fiery beacon, and on her finger, sparkling under the lights of the paparazzi flashbulbs, was Annalise's ring. Annalise's team was flawless. A waiter with a camera in his tie pin, a woman pretending to be a tipsy guest, stumbling into Kendra and getting a close-up shot with her phone, a long lens camera from a concealed position across the lawn. They captured it all. The ring on Kendra's finger as she held Julian's hand, the ring as she lifted a glass of champagne to her lips, the ring as she gesticulated animatedly in conversation with one of Julian's business rivals. But the final piece of the plan was the most vicious. Annalise had learned that Julian was in the middle of closing a massive career-defining merger with a conservative family-run Japanese tech conglomerate, a company run by the elderly traditionalist Mr. Tanaka. The deal was worth billions and was in its final delicate stages. Mr. Tanaka, as it happened, was the guest of honor at the Serpentine Party. Annalise waited until she saw her team's footage of Mr. Tanaka shaking hands with Julian. Then she gave the signal. She had hired a translator. She had drafted a letter. And she had prepared a package. The package contained the high-resolution photos and video of Kendra wearing the ring at the party. It also contained a copy of Annalise and Julian's wedding announcement from Vogue, with a beautifully captioned photo of the very same ring on Annalise's finger. It included a brief, elegantly worded note translated into perfect Japanese. The note, written from the perspective of a concerned friend of the Croft family, expressed deep worry over Mr. Croft's erratic and dishonorable behavior. It spoke of the deep shame of flaunting a mistress wearing his pregnant wife's sacred wedding ring in front of a respected business partner. It didn't ask for anything. It simply presented the devastating, undeniable facts. The package was delivered by a discreet courier to Mr. Tanaka's hotel, the Dorchester, at midnight. Annalise turned off the live feed. She stood and walked to the window, looking out over the sleeping city of London. She felt no joy, no triumph, just the cold, grim satisfaction of a plan perfectly executed. She had used Julian's own arrogance, his own tools of wealth and power against him. She had turned his public stage into a platform for his own humiliation. The symphony of destruction was reaching its crescendo. The financial ruin was coming. The social disgrace was in motion, and the final crushing blow was about to land. She placed a hand on her belly, feeling the strong, steady kick of her child. This was her new empire, and its foundations were being built on the scorched earth of Julian Croft's world. The call came 2 days later. Annalise was back in New York in her war room finalizing the details of the Sotheby's auction with a representative. Her phone buzzed, displaying a number she didn't recognize, but the London country code was unmistakable. She excused herself and took the call. It was Mr. Tanaka's chief of staff. His English was formal, precise. "Ms. Varenne," he began without preamble. "Mr. Tanaka extends his deepest apologies for the dishonor you have faced. He has reviewed the information that was brought to his attention. The merger with Croft Enterprises has been terminated effective immediately. Mr. Tanaka believes that a man who shows such profound disrespect to his own family cannot be a trustworthy business partner. He wishes you and your child health and peace." Annalise closed her eyes, a single slow tear tracing a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of vindication. It was the first tear she had shed since that night at the gala. It was a release. The first domino had fallen, and it was a domino the size of a skyscraper. The news of the failed merger hit the financial world like a thunderclap. The stock of Croft Enterprises, already shaky from the rumors of Julian's marital strife, plummeted. It dropped 20% in the first hour of trading, then 30%. Analysts on Bloomberg and CNBC were scrambling, speaking of a catastrophic collapse of confidence in Julian Croft's leadership. His carefully constructed image as an invincible Midas touch dealmaker was shattered overnight. Julian, who had flown back from London in a panic, was now in full-blown meltdown. His voicemails, which Annalise continued to archive as evidence, had devolved into a pathetic mix of rage threats of financial ruin against her and desperate, tearful pleas for forgiveness. He was a cornered animal lashing out in every direction. But Annalise was insulated from his chaos. Delilah Vance had moved swiftly, obtaining a restraining order that barred him from coming within 500 feet of the penthouse, or of Annalise herself. The locks were changed. The security team was a constant, silent presence. He was locked out of his home, his company was in free fall, and his reputation was in tatters. The final act of Annalise's revenge was designed to be the most personal, the most psychologically devastating. It was scheduled for the day of the Sotheby's auction. The auction room was packed. The art world cognoscenti wealthy collectors and museum curators were all there, eager for a chance to acquire a piece from the now infamous collection of Annalise Varenne. But there was another element in the room. The press. Annalise, through her PR firm, had ensured that journalists from every major news outlet were present ostensibly to cover the high-profile sale. In reality, they were there to witness the final humiliation of Julian Croft. Annalise was not there in person. She watched via a private live stream from the comfort of her penthouse, a cup of calming chamomile tea in her hand. She had done her part. Now she would watch the pieces fall. As the auction began, the first piece on the block was a small, intimate Warhol sketch of a soup can, a piece Julian had bought for her on their first anniversary. It sold for 3 times its estimate. The next, a vibrant Chagall, also soared past its expected price. The bidding was frenetic. The provenance of the collection, now tied to such a juicy high society scandal, had made it even more desirable. But the main event, the piece everyone was waiting for, was the last lot of the collection, Monet's Nymphaeus. The very painting Julian had failed to acquire the day he met Annalise. He had bought it for her a year later, surprising her with it on her birthday. A grand romantic gesture meant to symbolize that he could and would get anything he wanted. As the auctioneer introduced the Monet, a hush fell over the room. The painting, a swirling masterpiece of water lilies and reflected light, was projected onto a large screen. The bidding started high and climbed rapidly. 1 million, 2 million, 5. The numbers flew back and forth between 2 determined phone bidders. Then, just as the bidding reached $8 million, a commotion was heard at the back of the auction room. The press cameras swiveled in unison. It was Julian. He looked like a man who had been dragged through hell. His suit was rumpled, his face was pale and unshaven, his eyes wild with desperation. He had clearly violated the restraining order to be here. He stumbled into the room, pushing past the security guards who tried to stop him. "Stop!" he yelled, his voice cracking. "Stop the sale. That's my painting. This is all my property." The room erupted into chaos. The auctioneer banged his gavel, trying to restore order. The journalists surged forward, their cameras, flashing their microphones, extended to capture every second of the breakdown. Julian's eyes scanned the room, searching, lost. "Annalise!" he screamed, his voice now raw with anguish. "Annalise, please don't do this." He looked directly into one of the press cameras, as if he knew she would be watching. And in that moment, the arrogant billionaire, the powerful titan, the king of his own universe, finally broke. His face crumpled. Sobs, deep and racking, tore through him. Tears streamed down his pale, stubbled cheeks, unabashed and pathetic. He sank to his knees in the middle of the crowded, silent auction house, a king weeping amongst the ruins of his plundered kingdom. "I'm sorry," he whispered the words, choked by tears. "I've lost everything. I've lost you. I'm nothing without you. Please, come back." He looked up, his eyes pleading, not at the auctioneer, not at the crowd, but at the cold, impersonal lens of the camera. He was speaking to her and to the entire world. The image of the weeping millionaire, brought to his knees by the wife he had scorned, was instantly broadcast across the globe. In her silent penthouse, Annalise watched the screen, her face impassive. She felt a profound, aching sadness, not for him, but for the woman she had been. The woman who had loved him so completely, so naively. She felt a pang for the love she had thought was real, for the future she had thought they would share. But that woman was gone. She reached for her phone and sent a single text message to Delilah Vance. "It's done. File the papers." Then she stood up and walked over to the large window overlooking Central Park. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the city. Below, life went on indifferent to the dramas of the wealthy and powerful. In the park, children were playing. Couples were strolling. A new world was waiting. She placed both hands on her belly, on the new life that was her future, her real legacy. The empire of Julian Croft was a heap of smouldering ash, but hers, the empire of Annalise Varenne, and her child was just beginning to rise. She was free, and for the first time in a very long time she smiled a genuine, peaceful smile, feeling the gentle, reassuring kick of the future within her. The revenge was complete. Now it was time to live. And there you have it, a story not just of betrayal, but of resurrection. Annalise's journey shows us that the deepest wounds can forge the strongest weapons, and that a woman's power, once unleashed, can topple any empire. She didn't just get even. She rewrote the rules of the game and built a new kingdom from the ashes of a broken heart. Her victory wasn't just in Julian's tears, but in her own quiet strength as she turned to face a future she alone would command. What did you think of Annalise's ultimate revenge? Was it justice, or was it too cold? A penthouse overlooking Central Park, a walk-in closet overflowing with Hermes, and a baby on the way. Anya had it all, or so she thought. In the blink of an eye, her billionaire husband, a man who once promised her the world, stood before her, his words colder than the winter wind whipping across their panoramic window. "I want a divorce." But before the ink could dry on the papers, a knock on the door changed everything. His mistress wasn't there to gloat. She was there to expose a secret so dark it would make his demand for a divorce the least of Anya's worries. The scent of blooming peonies and old money filled the air of the penthouse apartment on the 82nd floor of 432 Park Avenue. It was a sterile, curated scent, one that Anya had come to associate with her life, beautiful, expensive, and utterly devoid of the earthy reality she secretly craved. From this height, New York City was a glittering, silent diorama. The yellow cabs were ants, the sprawling green of Central Park, a manicured carpet, and the people, the millions of bustling, striving souls, were entirely insignificant, just like her. Anya traced the rim of her porcelain teacup, the delicate floral pattern a stark contrast to the stark minimalist decor Julian insisted upon. Everything was shades of grey chrome and glass. It was the home of a man who admired his reflections both literal and financial. He called it uncluttered. Anya called it empty. Her hand drifted down to the gentle swell of her stomach, a 6-month bump that was her only true possession in this sky-high palace. This baby, her baby, was the one vibrant, chaotic, and real thing in her life. It was a secret garden she nurtured within herself, a world away from Julian's meticulous control. Julian Tulsell Croft. To the world, he was a titan of industry, a visionary in the volatile world of tech mergers and acquisitions. His face, all sharp angles and disarming smiles, graced the covers of Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. He had a Midas touch, turning fledgling startups into billion-dollar unicorns with a flick of his pen. He had swept Anya off her feet 5 years ago. She was a junior art curator, then full of opinions and passion, and he had seemed utterly captivated by her spirit. He'd courted her with the kind of grand cinematic gestures that leave a woman breathless: a private viewing at the Met, a weekend trip to Paris, on a whim a rare first-edition book of poetry she'd once mentioned in passing. He had built a gilded cage for her, and she, dazzled by the shine, had walked right in. She'd given up her small gallery job, her cramped but cozy apartment in the village, and her circle of wonderfully messy artistic friends. Julian had said he wanted to give her the world. She hadn't realized he meant he wanted to become her entire world. The sound of the private elevator chiming its arrival pulled her from her reverie. Julian was home. Early. A knot of unease tightened in her stomach, a feeling that had become increasingly familiar over the past few months. He strode into the living area, looking every inch the master of the universe. His bespoke Tom Ford suit clung perfectly to his athletic frame, his dark hair was impeccably styled, and his face held the neutral, unreadable expression he reserved for high-stakes negotiations. He didn't look at her, his eyes fixed on the panoramic view, as if calculating its net worth. Julian Anya began, her voice softer than she intended. "You're home. I was just about to have the chef start on dinner." He turned then, and the coldness in his eyes extinguished the small flicker of hope in her chest. There was no warmth, no flicker of recognition for his pregnant wife. It was the look he gave a line item on a balance sheet that was underperforming. "Don't bother," he said, his voice flat and clipped. He walked over to the marble bar and poured himself a whiskey, the clink of the decanter against the glass unnaturally loud in the silent room. "We need to talk, Anya." Anya's hand instinctively went back to her belly, a protective gesture. "Is everything all right? Did the deal with the Japanese consortium fall through?" She tried to grasp for a familiar topic, a corner of his life she was still permitted to understand. He took a long swallow of his drink, his throat bobbing. "The deal is fine. Everything in my life is perfectly aligned. Except this." He gestured vaguely between them, an all-encompassing wave that dismissed their 5 years of marriage. Their shared bed, the child growing inside her. This, she whispered, her heart beginning to hammer against her ribs. This marriage, he stated, turning to face her fully. His face was a mask of detached finality. "It's run its course. It no longer serves its purpose. I want a divorce." The words hung in the air, sharp and deadly, like shards of glass from the panoramic window he so admired. Anya felt the blood drain from her face. She must have misheard. This was Julian's idea of a joke, a cruel, power-playing jest to see her squirm. "A divorce," she stammered, a hysterical little laugh escaping her lips. "Julian, what are you talking about?" "I'm pregnant. We're having a baby." "I'm aware of the child's existence," he said, his voice laced with an icy patience that was more terrifying than any shout. "My lawyers have already been instructed to be generous. A trust will be established for the child. You will be provided with a settlement that will allow you to live very comfortably. A nice apartment, a staff, whatever you need. You will want for nothing materially." Materially. The word was an insult, a deliberate reduction of her life, her love, her very being to a transaction. The man who had once quoted poetry to her was now liquidating her like a bad asset. "I don't want a settlement, Julian. I want my husband. I want the father of my child." Her voice cracked, the carefully constructed composure of the perfect wife, shattering into a million pieces. Tears streamed down her face, hot and furious. "What has happened to you? What has happened to us? Nothing has happened," he insisted, his calm unwavering. He was a stone wall, impervious to her pain. This was always a contract, Anya. An arrangement. You provided beauty, social grace, a certain aesthetic. I provided a lifestyle beyond your wildest dreams. The contract is now being terminated. A contract. She stared at him aghast. The last 5 years replayed in her mind, now tainted and twisted by his cruel words. Every shared laugh, every tender touch, every whispered promise now felt like a lie, a performance. She felt a wave of nausea so profound it had nothing to do with her pregnancy. She had been a fool, a beautiful, well-kept, blind fool. There's someone else, isn't there? The question was a classic, a cliché she never thought she'd utter. For the first time, a flicker of something crossed his face. Not guilt, but a flicker of annoyance, as if she were a fly buzzing around his head. That's irrelevant to the situation. Irrelevant? She cried, her voice rising. You're throwing me out pregnant with your child, and you tell me your mistress is irrelevant. Who is she, Julian? He walked over to the sleek obsidian desk in the corner and pulled a thick document from a leather briefcase. He tossed it onto the glass coffee table between them. The sound was a final, definitive thud. These are the divorce papers, he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. My lawyers advise you to sign them without contest. A prolonged, messy battle will not be beneficial for you, or for the public's perception of you. I have a reputation to maintain. He was threatening her. He was threatening to paint her as a gold digger, a shrew, to drag her name through the mud, while he stood pristine on his mountain of money. The cruelty was breathtaking. He wasn't just ending their marriage. He was trying to erase her, to control the very narrative of her existence, even as he expelled her from his. She looked from the papers to his cold, handsome face. The man she loved, or the man she thought she loved, was gone. In his place stood a monster, a creature of pure, unadulterated avarice and ego. A profound, chilling clarity washed over her. The shock receded, replaced by a nascent, unfamiliar anger. No, she said, her voice trembling, but firm. Julian raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. No. I will not sign these. I will not be discarded like one of your failed investments. This child, she said, her hand protectively cradling her belly, deserves a father. And I deserve an explanation. A real one. Julian's jaw tightened. He was not used to being told no. The air crackled with his silent fury. He took a step towards her, his physical presence suddenly feeling overwhelming, threatening. You are making a grave mistake, Anya, he hissed. You have no idea what you're messing with. You have no idea the forces at play here. Sign the papers. Take the money. Disappear quietly. It's the best option for everyone. His words held a hidden weight, a darker undercurrent that went beyond a simple sordid affair. The forces at play here. It wasn't the plea of a man in love with someone else. It was a warning, a threat. Before Anya could respond, before she could decipher the strange, panicked glint in his eyes, the chime of the private elevator echoed through the penthouse once more. Both their heads snapped towards the sound. Julian's face for the first time that evening lost its composure. A flash of pure, unadulterated panic crossed his features so quick that Anya almost missed it. He looked trapped. Who is that? Anya asked, her own confusion mounting. They weren't expecting anyone. Julian guarded their privacy with a zeal that bordered on paranoid. Don't. Julian breathed his eyes wide as he stared at the elevator doors. It wasn't a command to Anya, but a desperate plea to the universe. The polished steel doors slid open with a soft, expensive sigh. Standing in the doorway was a woman. She was breathtakingly beautiful, with raven black hair cut into a sharp, severe bob, and eyes the color of emeralds. She wore a crimson dress that clung to her like a second skin, a stark, bloody slash of color in the monochrome world of Julian's penthouse. Anya's heart stopped. It had to be her. The mistress. She had come to gloat, to witness the final destruction of the wife to claim her prize. Anya braced herself for the humiliation, the final crushing blow. But the woman's eyes weren't on Anya. They were locked on Julian, and they held no trace of triumph. Her beautiful face was pale. Her hands were trembling, and her emerald eyes were wide with a terror that mirrored the panic on Julian's face. She took a shaky step into the room. Julian, the woman, said, her voice a ragged whisper that cut through the silence. "It's over. They know. They know everything." Julian stared at her, his mask of control utterly shattered. He looked like a man staring at his own ghost. Anya looked back and forth between her husband and this beautiful, terrified stranger. A cold dread far deeper and more terrifying than the pain of betrayal began to creep up her spine. This wasn't about a simple affair. Julian's strange warning, his panic, this woman's fear, it was all connected to something far bigger. The divorce papers lay on the table, forgotten. The gilded cage had just burst open, but Anya had a sickening feeling that she hadn't been set free. She had just been tossed into the fire. The woman in the crimson dress took another hesitant step into the cavernous living room. Her designer heels, which should have clicked with authority on the polished marble floor, were instead unnervingly silent, as if she were trying to retract her own presence. Anya's mind, still reeling from the whiplash of the divorce demand, struggled to process this new bizarre tableau. The mistress, for who else could she be, wasn't acting like a victor. She was acting like a fugitive. "Isabel, what the hell are you doing here?" Julian finally managed to say, his voice a strangled rasp. He shot a venomous glare at her, a look that was less about a spurned lover and more about a co-conspirator who had broken rank. He moved almost unconsciously to position himself between Isabel and Anya, a futile attempt to control the flow of information. "I tried to call you Isabel," said her voice, trembling. She ignored Anya completely, her gaze fixed on Julian's increasingly frantic expression. "Your phone was off. I left a dozen messages with your secretary. I had to come. We don't have any time." "Time for what?" Anya interjected, her voice finding a new steely edge. The initial shock was beginning to curdle into suspicion. "Time to coordinate your stories before you throw me out." Isabel's head snapped towards Anya, and for the first time she seemed to truly see her. There was no malice in her emerald eyes, no smug superiority. Instead, Anya saw a flicker of something that looked unnervingly like pity. It was an expression that infuriated Anya more than any taunt could have. "This has nothing to do with your marriage," Isabel said, with a dismissive wave of her hand that was so absolute it was chilling. "That's just collateral damage. A loose end he was trying to tie up." "A loose end," Anya repeated the words, tasting like ash. She looked at Julian, whose face was now a ghastly shade of pale. "Is that what I am to you, Julian? A loose end?" "Shut up!" Isabel Julian roared, finally losing the last vestige of his icy control. He lunged towards her, grabbing her arm. You shouldn't be here. We had a plan. The plan is shot to hell. Julian. Isabel wrenched her arm free, her fear momentarily eclipsed by a surge of anger. The plan went up in smoke the moment my brother's name appeared on the SEC's inquiry list this morning. The acronym hung in the air, SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. The federal agency that policed Wall Street, the boogeyman of every high-flying financier. It was a name Anya knew from the headlines from the periphery of Julian's world, but it had never felt real, never had any bearing on her curated life. Until now. What SEC inquiry Anya demanded stepping forward? She was no longer just a passive victim in a domestic drama. She was an unwilling participant in something far more sinister. Julian. What is she talking about? She's talking nonsense. Julian spat, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape route that didn't exist 82 floors in the sky. She's hysterical. Her brother made some bad investments, and now she's panicking and trying to drag me into it. He was trying to rebuild his wall of composure, but the cracks were showing. His hands were trembling, and a thin sheen of sweat had broken out on his forehead. Bad investments. Isabel let out a sharp, bitter laugh that held no humor. Is that what you call it? You used him. Julian. You used my family's brokerage firm as a shield. You ran the entire scheme through their accounts. Made them look like the masterminds while you stayed clean. Scheme. The word was a poison dart. Anya's gaze swung back to Julian. His entire empire, his Midas touch, was it all just a trick? A lie, just like their marriage. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, his voice low and threatening as he took a step towards Isabel. And I suggest you leave now before you say something you'll regret. No. Isabel stood her ground, her chin held high. The fear was still there, but it was now bolstered by a desperate, cornered resolve. I'm not taking the fall for you. My brother is not going to prison for you. I loved you, Julian, or I thought I did, but I see what you are now. You don't love anyone. You consume them. You use them up, and then you discard the husk. Her eyes flickered to Anya. She knows. Don't you? Anya thought back. The last 6 months, Julian's increasing secrecy, his late nights at the office, which she had assumed were due to his affair, the strange hushed phone calls he would take in his study, ending them abruptly if she walked in, the way he had systematically isolated her, severing her ties to her old friends, even discouraging visits from her own family, claiming he wanted to protect her peace and privacy during her pregnancy. It hadn't been about protecting her. It had been about isolating a witness. What scheme, Julian Anya's voice was dangerously quiet. The tears were gone. In their place was a cold, terrifying calm. What did you do? Anya, listen to me, Julian said, turning to her, his voice attempting a gentleness that now sounded grotesque and manipulative. She's a scorned woman. She's trying to ruin me because I ended our affair. It's the oldest story in the book. You're my wife. You're the mother of my child. It's you I'm trying to protect. He was trying to play her to use their shared history and their unborn child as a shield. But the spell was broken. She could see the puppeteer's strings. Protect. She repeated, her voice dripping with scorn. By demanding a divorce an hour ago, by calling me a loose end, you needed to tie up. You weren't trying to protect me. You were trying to cut me loose before the ship sank, weren't you? You wanted to make sure I couldn't claim a single cent of your precious, dirty money when it all came crashing down. The truth of it hit her with the force of a physical blow. The divorce wasn't about his love for Isabel. It was a calculated financial maneuver. A preemptive strike in a war he knew was coming. He was willing to make his own pregnant wife a refugee from his life to save himself. It's called a SPAC, Isabel said, suddenly, her voice sharp and clear. She was no longer speaking just to Julian, but to Anya, to the room, to the universe. She was confessing. A special purpose acquisition company. It's the cleanest grift on Wall Street right now. Anya had heard Julian talk about SPACs. He'd called them blank check companies, a faster, more efficient way to take a private company, public bypassing the rigorous scrutiny of a traditional IPO. He had launched 3 of them in the last 2 years, raising billions from investors eager to get in on the ground floor of his next big thing. The media had lauded him as an innovator. Your husband, Isabel, continued, her voice gaining a morbid momentum, is a master at selling dreams. He would launch a SPAC, promising to merge it with a revolutionary tech company. The hype alone would send the stock soaring. Investors from massive hedge funds to ordinary people would pour their life savings into it all, based on his reputation. She paused, taking a shaky breath. But there was no company, Anya. There was never any revolutionary tech. It was all smoke and mirrors. A shell game. Julian lunged for her again. You're lying, am I? Isabel sidestepped him, her eyes burning with a righteous fury. Tell her about Project Chimera, Julian. Tell her about the next-gen AI integration platform that was going to change the world. Show her the fancy prospectus, the one with the fabricated data and the photoshopped pictures of a non-existent office in Silicon Valley. She turned back to Anya, her voice dropping. The money from the investors. It wasn't used for acquisitions. It was funneled, laundered through a complex web of offshore accounts and shell corporations, one of which was my brother's unwitting firm. Julian would skim off hundreds of millions, paying off early investors with money from new ones to keep the illusion going. It's a classic Ponzi scheme, Anya just dressed up in a fancy Wall Street suit. And the whole thing is about to collapse. Anya stared at Julian, waiting for him to deny it, to rage, to offer some plausible explanation. But he said nothing. He simply stood there, breathing heavily, the cornered animal, the master of the universe, brought low by a single unraveling thread. The entire foundation of her life, the penthouse, the clothes, the art, the security was not just built on lies, but on theft, on the stolen dreams and life savings of countless unknown people. She felt a dizzying vertigo, the floor seeming to drop away beneath her. Her hand flew to her stomach, to the one pure thing in this world of deceit. This child, her son or daughter, was heir to a fortune that didn't exist, a legacy of shame. So the divorce. Anya trailed off, the full, monstrous picture becoming clear. The settlement you offered me, that generous trust for our little child. Where was that money coming from, Julian? He finally looked at her, and in his eyes she saw the dark, terrifying truth. It's the last of the clean money, isn't it? She whispered in horror. The money you had before all this started. You were trying to firewall it, to put it in my name and the baby's name so the SEC couldn't touch it when they came for the rest. You weren't giving me a gift. You were using your pregnant wife and your unborn child as a money mule. The silence that followed was a confession. It was the most damning sound Anya had ever heard. The man she had married was not just a cheat or a liar. He was a predator of the highest order, and he had just tried to make her his final accomplice. The doorbell chimed. Not the private elevator this time, but the main service door to the apartment. A loud, insistent official buzzing. It was a sound none of them could ignore. Julian, Isabel, and Anya all froze, their three-person drama instantly rendered insignificant. This was no longer a private implosion. The outside world was knocking. Julian's eyes, wide with terror, met Anya's. The last shred of his bravado was gone, replaced by the primal fear of a man whose time had run out. The buzzing came again, longer this time, more demanding. "Don't answer it," Julian whispered, a desperate, futile command. But Anya was already walking towards the door. The fog of her shock and betrayal was beginning to clear, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. She had been a pawn in his game for far too long. The game was over. Her hand closed around the cold steel handle of the door. Whatever was on the other side, it was the beginning of her new reality. She had to face it, for herself and for the child she carried. She pulled the door open. Standing in the hallway were two men in dark, conservative suits. They were nondescript, their faces impassive, but they carried an aura of unshakable authority that made the air in the multi-million-dollar penthouse feel cheap and thin. One of them held up a badge and an official-looking document. Julian Croft, the lead agent, asked, his voice calm and professional, but with an underlying steel that tolerated no argument. His eyes flicked past Anya to where Julian stood frozen in the middle of the living room. "I'm Agent Miller with the FBI. We have a warrant to search these premises." The FBI. The letters seemed to suck all the remaining oxygen out of the room. It was one thing to hear the acronym SEC from a panicked mistress. It was another to see the flesh and blood embodiment of a federal investigation standing on your doorstep. Julian looked as if he had been turned to stone. The blood had drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy grey pallor. He stared at the agents, his mouth slightly agape. The master manipulator suddenly a speechless puppet. Isabel let out a small, choked sob and sank onto one of the ridiculously expensive minimalist sofas, her crimson dress pooling around her like a stain. The fight had gone out of her, replaced by the grim resignation of someone who had pulled the pin on a grenade and was now simply waiting for the blast. Agent Miller and his partner stepped into the apartment, their sensible shoes making solid, real-world sounds on the marble floor. Anya stepped back, a strange sense of detachment washing over her. She was watching a movie of her own life imploding. The agent's eyes swept the room, cataloguing the art, the furniture, the view, not with admiration, but with the cold appraisal of an asset seizure. "We also have a warrant for your arrest." "Mr. Croft." Agent Miller continued in the same dispassionate tone, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "For conspiracy to commit securities fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering." The words were a death sentence, a formal indictment of everything Isabel had just revealed. The Ponzi scheme project, Chimera. The stolen money, it was all real. And now the consequences were real too. "This is a mistake," Julian finally stammered, his voice weak and unconvincing. "My lawyers." "Your lawyers have been notified," Agent Miller cut him off smoothly. "They can meet you downtown. Please place your hands behind your back." The sight of Julian Croft, the titan of Wall Street, the man whose confident smirk had sold billions in fraudulent dreams, being handcuffed in his own living room, was surreal. The metallic click of the cuffs locking into place was the final definitive sound of his world ending. He didn't resist. The fight was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed shock. As the second agent began to lead Julian towards the door, Isabel suddenly stood up, her face streaked with tears, but her voice filled with a new urgent terror. "Wait!" she cried out, her voice sharp. "That's not all. That's not the real reason." Agent Miller paused, turning to her with a look of mild professional interest. "The real reason for what, ma'am?" "For the divorce," she said, pointing a trembling finger at Julian. "For why he had to get her out. It's not just about the money. There's something else. Something worse." Anya, who had been standing silently by the wall, felt a new wave of ice-cold dread. Worse. What could possibly be worse than a billion-dollar fraud that had ruined countless lives? What was the dark secret that even a massive financial crime was meant to cover up? Julian's head snapped up. He shot a look at Isabel, a look of pure murderous rage mixed with desperate pleading. "Isabel, no. Don't. I have to," she sobbed. "They need to know everything. They need to know why you were so desperate." She turned to the agents, her words tumbling out in a frantic, disjointed rush. "The SPACs. The fraud. That was the end game. But it started somewhere else. It started with his first company, Gen Tech Solutions." Anya vaguely remembered the name. It was the company Julian had founded before they met the one that had given him his initial millions and launched his reputation as a tech prodigy. He had sold it for a massive profit years ago. "What about it?" Agent Miller asked, his patience clearly wearing thin. Gentech's flagship product was a proprietary data encryption software, Isabel explained, her voice gaining clarity as she forced the story out. It was sold to dozens of high-level corporate clients, banks, law firms, private equity funds. They promised impenetrable security. She took a deep breath, her eyes locking onto Anya's. The pity was back in her gaze, but now it was deeper, darker, filled with a horror that Anya couldn't yet comprehend. But it wasn't an encryption software, Anya. It was a key. Julian built a back door into the system, a master key that gave him access to everything. For years, he had a live feed into the most sensitive corporate data in the country. Mergers and acquisitions plans, confidential legal strategies, insider trading information. The scale of it was dizzying. Julian hadn't just been a con artist. He had been a digital phantom, a ghost in the machine systematically stealing the lifeblood of the corporate world. That's how he made his first fortune. Isabel continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper. It wasn't genius. It was theft on an industrial scale. He knew which companies were going to be acquired before they did. He knew which stocks would soar and which would plummet. He wasn't predicting the market. He was reading the script. The agents exchanged a look. This was new information. This went beyond the SPACs. This was the origin story of his entire criminal enterprise. But that's still not the secret. Isabel choked out, tears streaming down her face again. That's just more fraud. Then what is it? Anya finally spoke, her voice a hollow echo in the room. She had to know. She had to know the final, terrible truth that was poisoning the very air she breathed. Isabel's gaze was fixed on Anya's pregnant belly. 2 years ago, one of the companies he was spying on, a pharmaceutical firm called Biovance. They were on the verge of a major breakthrough, a revolutionary new gene therapy treatment. But they had a problem. Their final human trials were showing some irregularities, dangerous side effects that they were trying to solve before announcing the drug. Julian was now shaking his head violently, his muffled pleas ignored by the agent holding him. "Don't say it, Isabel. Please." Julian knew the drug was flawed. Isabel forged on her voice, cracking with the weight of her confession. He had access to the raw, hidden data. He knew it was dangerous. But he also knew that if another company acquired Biovance before the flaws were public, the stock would triple overnight. So he used his insider information. He leaked the news of the potential breakthrough without mentioning the dangerous side effects to a rival corporation. They initiated a hostile takeover, and Julian, having bought millions in Biovance stock beforehand, made a fortune. Over $200 million in a single week. That's insider trading. A huge case, but Agent Miller prompted. But it wasn't just insider trading. Isabel screamed, the sound raw and agonizing. The new company, eager to recoup their investment, rushed the drug to market. They buried the flawed data. They pushed it through a compromised approval process. The drug was called Veridia. Anya's blood ran cold. Veridia. The name was a lightning bolt, a searing brand on her memory. It was prescribed as an advanced fertility treatment. Isabel whispered, her eyes locked on Anya's. For couples who had tried everything else, it was hailed as a miracle drug. Anya's hand, the one not pressed against her stomach, flew to her mouth. No, it couldn't be. The room began to spin. The minimalist grey walls seemed to close in on her. She and Julian had struggled to conceive. For 2 years they had been through a heart-breaking cycle of hope and disappointment. Doctors had found no specific issue, just unexplained infertility. Then a year ago, a new specialist, a top doctor recommended by Julian himself, had suggested a new cutting-edge treatment. A miracle drug from Europe, he had called it. Its name was Veridia. Anya stared at Julian, at the man she had married, the man whose child she was carrying. The man who had looked on with what she thought was shared joy when the pregnancy test finally came back positive. But it hadn't been joy. It had been the culmination of a monstrous plan. The side effects, Anya could barely form the words. Her throat was tight with terror. What were the side effects? Julian finally broke. A guttural, animalistic sob tore from his chest. Anya, I'm sorry. I can fix it. We have money. The best doctors. Isabel gave the final brutal answer, her voice devoid of all emotion, a flat line of horror. It worked. The drug allowed women to conceive. That part was true. But the hidden data from the original trials showed that in nearly 80% of cases, the fetus would develop a rare and fatal neurological disorder. Most didn't survive the 3rd trimester. Those who were born didn't live past their 1st year. The world went silent. The agents, the handcuffs, the penthouse, it all dissolved into an indistinct blur. The only thing that was real was the life kicking inside her. A life she had craved, a life she had celebrated, a life that had been conceived through a monstrous lie, a poison given to her by the man she loved. This was the dark secret. The divorce wasn't about protecting his money. It was about severing all ties before his child was born with the fatal condition he himself had knowingly unleashed upon the world. He wasn't trying to disown a wife. He was trying to outrun a death sentence. He was trying to erase the ultimate evidence of his crime, his own dying child. Anya looked at her husband, the father of her child, the architect of her destruction. He was no longer a man. He was a void. A black hole of greed and ambition that had consumed everything, including the life of his own unborn baby. The strength drained from her legs. The room tilted violently, the glittering view of Central Park spinning into a nauseating vortex. As her knees buckled and the world faded to black, the last thing she heard was the distant hollow sound of her own scream. Anya awoke to a world bleached of all color. The first sensation was not sight, but smell. A sharp, aggressive scent of antiseptic that scoured her nostrils and bore no resemblance to the curated peony and old money fragrance of her former life. The second was sound, the soft, insistent, and terrifyingly rhythmic beep of a machine somewhere to her left. For a fleeting, merciful moment, she was adrift in a sea of disorientation, the horrors of the previous evening feeling like the suffocating remnants of a fever dream. Had it been real? The cold words, the crimson dress, the click of handcuffs. Then, with the force of a physical impact, the memories crashed back in. Viridia. The name detonated in her mind a single word that contained a universe of betrayal. It was the name of the drug. The poison, the monstrous lie she had welcomed into her body. A raw, guttural sob tore itself from her throat, and her hand, trembling uncontrollably, flew to her stomach. The gentle, reassuring swell was still there, a fragile vessel in a venomous sea. Was her baby the one pure thing she had left already a ghost? Easy now, Mrs. Croft. Take a deep breath. A calm, steady voice pierced through the fog of her panic. A woman in navy blue scrubs her face, a welcome portrait of professional kindness, was adjusting the IV drip in Anya's arm. You fainted. We brought you straight to Lenox Hill Hospital. We've been monitoring you and the baby. The baby, Anya's voice was a ragged whisper, a thread of sound in the cavernous silence of her fear. She couldn't bring herself to ask the real question, the one that clawed at the inside of her skull. Is it dying? The nurse's eyes softened with understanding. The baby is fine, she said, her words deliberate and clear. A little stressed when you were brought in, but the heartbeat is strong and steady now. Your own heart rate is elevated, which is understandable. You've had a severe shock. The baby is strong. 4 simple words. They were not a cure, not a promise, but they were a lifeline. In the raging flood of her shattered reality, Anya clung to them as if they were the last solid ground on earth. Her baby was a fighter. It was already more than its father had ever been. I need to see a doctor, Anya managed, pushing herself up slightly. The effort made the room spin. A specialist, not just an OB, a geneticist, someone who understands. I need to know everything. Her voice broke on the last word. She needed to know the shape of the monster she was facing. We've already paged the head of our maternal fetal medicine department, Dr. Elena Ramirez. The nurse reassured her, fluffing a thin pillow behind her head. She's the best. She'll be here to speak with you shortly. For now, just try to breathe. Rest was an impossible luxury. Her mind was a torture chamber, replaying Julian's face, twisting in panic, the cold finality of the FBI agent's voice, and Isabel's horrified confession over and over. The entire architecture of her life, a magnificent structure she had once admired, had been revealed as a criminal enterprise, a house of cards built on stolen dreams. And the final, most intimate, most unspeakable betrayal was swimming in her very womb, conceived from a miracle that was in truth a time bomb. As the nurse left to give her a moment, another figure appeared hesitantly in the doorway. It was Isabel. She had shed the blood-red dress, the armor of Julian's mistress, and now wore a simple, anonymous pair of jeans and a grey sweater. Her face was scrubbed clean of makeup, revealing the faint purple smudges of exhaustion beneath her eyes. The emerald fire in her irises had been banked, leaving a weary, sorrowful glow. Anya's body tensed. A primal part of her wanted to scream at this woman, the beautiful harbinger of her apocalypse. But the anger felt distant, a secondary emotion, muted by the all-consuming terror of Julian's ultimate sin. Isabel wasn't the enemy. She was just another piece of scorched debris in the blast radius of Julian Croft. "What do you want?" Anya asked, her voice raspy, devoid of accusation, but heavy with exhaustion. I came to see if you were all right," Isabel said, her voice barely a whisper. She hovered by the door, a respectful distance away, as if acknowledging she was trespassing on sacred ground of grief. "And to tell you, I told them everything." Anya remained silent, watching her. "The agents at the penthouse," Isabel clarified, twisting a loose thread on her sweater. "After they took you, I stayed for hours. I told them about Viridia, about the Bio-Vance data, about Julian's back door into Gentech. I gave them the offshore account numbers he'd bragged about, the server locations he thought were hidden. Everything I knew. My brother is working with them too. He's turning over every record from his firm. He's terrified, but he wants to make it right." Why Anya's question was genuine, a flicker of curiosity in the darkness. Why not just disappear? He would have given you money to run. Isabel finally met her gaze, and Anya saw the profound depth of her self-loathing. Because he was going to let my brother, my family, take the fall for a crime he masterminded. That was the first crack in the fantasy. But the moment I found out about Viridia, the real truth of it, I looked at him, Julian, the man I thought I loved, and I saw a void. It wasn't just greed, Anya. What kind of person knowingly condemns unborn children for profit? It was a level of evil I couldn't comprehend. Her eyes flickered to Anya's stomach. When he told me he was divorcing you, I knew why. He was running from the evidence, from his own child. And I knew you were pregnant, but I didn't know about the drug. Not until my brother's lawyer uncovered the connection. The thought of you, going through the rest of your pregnancy celebrating only to face that. She shook her head, a tear tracing a path down her pale cheek. I couldn't live with myself. I couldn't let you be the last one to know the truth. It was the only thing I could do to claw back a single shred of my own soul. In that moment, Anya saw past the affair, past the label of mistress. She saw another woman who had been utterly conned, another life consumed by Julian's insatiable ego. They were bound by a strange, twisted sisterhood forged in the fires of his spectacular destruction. They've frozen everything. Isabel added her voice, flat and emotionless. Every asset. The penthouse is a federal crime scene. The accounts are locked. The cars, the art, the watches, it's all gone. Evidence in the largest fraud case in a decade. His lawyers are saying the evidence is insurmountable. He'll never see the outside of a prison cell again. Good, a cold, hard part of Anya thought. Let him rot. But the satisfaction was hollow, a fleeting warmth in an Arctic landscape of pain. Julian's imprisonment couldn't reverse time, couldn't purify the poison. The door opened again, and a woman with intelligent, compassionate eyes and an air of calm authority entered the room. "Mrs. Croft, I'm Dr. Ramirez." With a final lingering look of profound regret, Isabel quietly slipped out of the room, leaving Anya to face her new reality. The next hour was a clinical, terrifying blur of medical terminology, consent forms, and agonizing questions. Dr. Ramirez was a miracle of empathy and professionalism. She explained the process for an advanced diagnostic amniocentesis carefully and patiently, outlining the procedure, the risks, and the stark reality of the potential results. She didn't offer false hope, only facts. And for that, Anya was grateful. "I have to know," Dr. Anya pleaded, her composure finally crumbling under the clinical weight of it all. "Whatever it is, I have to know what I'm facing." "We will get you answers, Dr." Ramirez promised, her hand briefly resting on Anya's arm. The simple human touch was grounding. "As quickly and as safely as we possibly can." The days that followed were a unique form of purgatory. Anya remained in the hospital, a voluntary prisoner in a sterile white room, while the world outside feasted on the carcass of her old life. The news of Julian's arrest had gone supernova. "Wall Street Wunderkind, or Ponzi King," screamed the cable news chyrons. His smug, handsome face was plastered everywhere, the poster boy for catastrophic hubris. The stories detailed the SPAC's fraud in lurid detail, but the darkest secret, the corporate evil of Viridia, remained a tightly sealed component of the federal case, a horror not yet fit for public consumption. Anya refused all visitors, save for her parents, who flew in immediately, their faces etched with a pain that mirrored her own. She hired a team of lawyers, not to fight for a share of Julian's blood money, but to meticulously expunge him from her life. To dissolve the marriage, to legally and financially firewall her child from the toxic Croft name and its indelible legacy of shame. She existed in a state of suspended animation, the week-long wait for the test results stretching into an eternity. She didn't sleep, she merely drifted in and out of consciousness. In her waking hours, she would stare out the window at the city, a city that now seemed alien to her. Every pregnant woman she saw, every baby in a stroller was a stab to the heart. She was suspended between a life that was over and a future that was too terrifying to contemplate. Finally, the day came. Dr. Ramirez entered her room alone, closing the door softly behind her. She held a file, and her expression was calm, professional, and utterly unreadable. Anya's heart began to pound, a frantic, desperate rhythm against her ribs. This was it, the precipice. She gripped her own hands over her belly, a protective gesture that felt painfully inadequate. Dr. Ramirez sat in the chair beside the bed, opened the file but didn't look at it. She looked directly at Anya. "We have the results from the full genomic sequencing panel," she said, her voice even. Anya held her breath, bracing for the impact, for the words that would shatter the final fragments of her world. Dr. Ramirez took a slow, deliberate breath. "Anya, your baby is perfectly healthy." The words didn't register. They were a language she had forgotten how to speak. Anya just stared at her, her mind a blank slate of incomprehension. "What, no? That's not possible. Viridia, the neurological degradation." "I know," the doctor said gently, her professional calm finally breaking into a warm, reassuring smile. "We read the federal case files your lawyers managed to get unsealed for us. We knew the exact rare genetic markers we were looking for, and they are not there. We ran the test twice to be certain. He is completely, unequivocally unaffected. He. Her mind snagged on the word. He. You're having a son. Anya Dr. Ramirez confirmed, her eyes shining. A healthy baby boy. The dam broke. A sound, a wail that was equal parts grief and joy, tore from deep inside her. It was the sound of a week of terror, of months of unknowing, of a lifetime of betrayal, being washed away by a single miraculous wave of relief. The tears came, then hot and cleansing, pouring down her face as she finally truly let go. But how she sobbed, her body shaking. Isabel said, 80%. 80% is not 100%, the doctor said, softly, her voice thick with emotion. It means 20%, 1 in 5 were spared. It's a game of Russian roulette, played with the most precious stakes imaginable. It's a monstrous, unforgivable gamble. But Anya, you and your son, you won. She won. It wasn't a victory over Julian. It was a victory over fate, over poison, over the darkness that had tried to claim her future. Anya checked out of the hospital the next morning. The world looked different, the colors more vibrant, the air cleaner. The Julian Croft penthouse on Park Avenue was sealed a monument to a dead life. She walked away from it without a backward glance. With a small, life-saving loan from her parents, she found a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn's Park Slope. It was a world away from the silent, sterile grandeur she had known. From her window, she saw not a curated park, but a living one. She could hear the joyful shrieks of children playing, the friendly bark of dogs, the distant, reassuring rumble of the F-train. It was the chaotic, beautiful symphony of real life. She spent the final peaceful months of her pregnancy rebuilding. She bought a second-hand crib and painted the nursery a cheerful, sunny yellow. She reconnected with her old circle of wonderfully messy, artistic friends who enveloped her in a cocoon of unconditional love and support, never once mentioning her notorious past. They brought her soup, helped her assemble furniture, and made her laugh, truly laugh for the first time in years. 3 months later, Leo Alexander was born, weighing 7 pounds 2 ounces. He was loud, demanding, and utterly perfect. He had her eyes and a stubborn tuft of dark hair. Holding him for the first time, skin to skin, feeling his tiny, fragile fingers instinctively curl around hers. Anya felt a love so vast and powerful it rearranged her entire universe. This was real wealth. This was a legacy. One rainy afternoon as a 2-week-old, Leo slept soundly on her chest. A news alert popped up on her phone. Julian Croft sentenced. She read that faced with an avalanche of evidence, and Isabel's unshakable testimony, he had accepted a plea bargain to avoid having the full horrific details of the Viridia scandal made public in a trial. He was sentenced to 150 years in a federal supermax facility with no possibility of parole. Anya looked down at her sleeping son, his chest rising and falling in a steady, peaceful rhythm. She felt no hatred for Julian, no desire for revenge. She felt nothing at all. He was a ghost, the antagonist of a story that was already over. Her story and Leo's was just beginning. Her life was no longer defined by the man she had lost, but by the son she had almost lost and had miraculously gained. She was not the millionaire's disgraced wife. She was Leo's mother, and in the quiet, sun-drenched world of her small Brooklyn apartment, she was the richest woman in the world. Anya's story is a harrowing journey from a gilded cage to true freedom. It's a reminder that wealth can be a mask for unimaginable darkness, and that true strength isn't found in penthouses or designer clothes, but in the fierce, unyielding power of a mother's love. She lost a life of luxury, but gained a life of purpose, proving that even after the most devastating betrayals, we have the power to rise from the ashes and build a new world for ourselves and for our children. Her story isn't just about the downfall of a wicked man, but the rise of an unbreakable woman.